Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is a 2.2-pound thin and light notebook from HP that measures just under 0.7 inches thick. It's a very sort of sleek machine with a magnesium aluminum chassis, so it's fairly sturdy as well. And it's also pretty powerful with an AMD Ryzen 5000U series processor, which does an excellent job of balancing performance and battery life. In my testing, this thing gets around 7 hours of use under heavy load. I was able to stream YouTube videos for around 10 hours, but it's also one of the fastest notebooks that I've tested in terms of benchmarks and day-to-day performance. So the most interesting thing about the laptop, though, is that it is not a premium model that's part of the HP Envy or Spectre series. It's a Pavilion branded notebook, which is normally associated with sort of entry-level budget notebooks from HP. And this has a starting price of just about $750. So what makes this different from sort of a more premium model? Not much, honestly. For the most part, it really does have the features that you'd expect from a more expensive machine, but you do sort of have to pay for the features that you want. So the starting price gets you a version with an AMD Ryzen 5 5600U 6-core 12-thread processor, 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, and a 1920 by 1200 pixel matte non-touch display. This has the same display, but this version that was sent to me for testing purposes by HP is about $1,000 with a Ryzen 7 5800U 8-core 16-thread processor, and it has 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigabytes of storage. Even though this sells for about $1,000, it does not have a backlit keyboard, and that's $20 extra. If you wanted to upgrade to a 2560 by 1600 pixel display, that's $30 extra. So you sort of pay for the features you want, but you do have a lot of customization options. And if you wanted to perform your own upgrades, that's sort of possible. You can upgrade the storage. So say you wanted to buy a version that has just 256 gigs built-in storage and then bring your own SSD. You can remove these little rubber feet on the bottom, get to a series of screws, remove them, open up the case, and access the SSD. The RAM, however, is soldered to the motherboard. So if you want more memory than 8 gigs, you're going to have to pay for it at launch, and 16 is the max. That's the most you're ever going to get. So those are a few of the limitations, but for the most part, this really does have elements that make it feel like a much more expensive machine. It's got a fingerprint sensor here, which works reasonably well. You can see it's got the design of sort of slim bezels here around the display on all sides. We've got a little bit of a drop hinge style design, which raises the keyboard a little bit when you sort of tilt it back there. When using this on your lap, it means that the bottom edge might sort of bite into your knees a little bit, but on a table or desktop, it gives it a pleasant tilt. The keyboard, while not backlit on the version that I'm testing, is pretty comfortable, and I actually really quite like the design of having the home page up and other keys on the end row here. So I find typing to be pretty comfortable on this laptop overall because the spacing is pretty good and the key travel is pretty good. The touchpad is nice and large, supports multi-touch gestures, 3 fingers to sort of go up and down here. And generally speaking, I'm really impressed with the performance. Now, you can go over to liliputing.com for details on benchmarks. What I found, and this seems to be true of other reviewers as well, is that AMD's Ryzen 7 5800U series chip scores really well in tests that really leverage multi-threaded performance. It's one of the fastest processors I've tried. Keep in mind, I mostly focus on thin and light machines, so we're talking about the 15 to 25 watt TDP range here. I haven't really looked at things like AMD's Threadripper or Intel's really high, energy hungry processors. But for portable computers, this is really one of the fastest chips that you can get. Single core performance, Intel still comes out ahead with its recent Tiger Lake 11th generation Intel Core i7 chips. And Intel really does have an edge when it comes to integrated graphics performance. So if you're doing video editing, graphic design, you might be better off with an Intel machine. But single core performance is still better than, say, an Intel chip from a couple of years ago. And that brings me to a comparison, which is my HP Spectre 13. This is an HP Spectre X360 13-inch notebook from a couple of years ago. It's got an 8th generation Intel Core processor, so it's a few years old at this point. This is a little bit heavier at around 2.8, 2.9 pounds. It is a little bit thinner, but you can barely tell the difference. when you put the two back to back. And I think the biggest difference is probably just that this is a convertible that you can use in sort of tablet mode, and it supports touch and pen input, and those things are not true of, I'm upside down here, but of this model. You might have noticed I also had facial recognition for the login, something that you don't have on the Pavilion Aero, and it's not even an option. But overall, you know, if we just put the displays right next to each other, there we go, you can see that the Aero is a slimmer bezel design, and that makes it a little bit more compact overall. So, and it's a matte display. So some people really like glossy because it seems more vivid, but you see a lot more glare. You can see my reflection there. You can barely see a reflection here. And if you point these both at the window, you'll notice sort of a lot of shine on the glossy screen and very little on the matte display. So, you know, if you're a fan of matte displays, then that's definitely a plus here. It doesn't have edge-to-edge glass, which means there's a little bit of a recessed area here around the bezels, but it's that slim bezel design, which is really pretty nice and easy to use. If we take a look around the sides, I'll take a look at the ports. We've got USB Type A, which because the side sort of comes up to have a thinner edge here, you have to pull down in order to insert something, but it works reasonably well. We've got an AC power adapter jack, HDMI, another USB Type A, and both of those Type A ports support 5 Gbps speeds. We've got a USB Type C port, which supports 10 Gbps speeds, and a headset jack. This is not Thunderbolt. It won't support an external graphics dock, but you can charge the laptop if you have a power supply that puts out 45 watts or more. The AC jack here is for the power supply that's included when you buy this, but if you have a third-party adapter, it'll work. You can also connect an external display or all sorts of other accessories using dongles or docking stations, etc. The power adapter is sort of a typical laptop-style brick. It's not super large, but it's not as small as, say, a smartphone adapter. And if you wanted to, if you had a power bank, you could extend your battery life by plugging into a USB power bank as well. One thing that I do like to test on laptops is Linux compatibility, and I have to say it's a little bit wonky on this particular model, so you can check out lilliputian.com for more details. But basically, if I reboot the computer and hit the escape key, I can get into a boot selection menu, so I can boot from a USB flash drive, no problem. And then when I boot into Ubuntu 20.04.3, which is a long-term service release that has up-to-date drivers, the display works, the audio works, the graphics, everything seems fine. The keyboard shortcuts even work, but the wireless does not work, and that makes using this just a little bit tricky. There does seem to be a wireless driver that you might be able to compile, but you probably have to either use another machine to transfer the data to this in order to do that, or plug in a USB Ethernet adapter, and I just didn't go down that path. Hopefully it'll get better over time as more people sort of look into getting Linux to run on devices that have the same Realtek Wi-Fi adapter as this model. But in my experience, the out-of-the-box experience, at least with Ubuntu, is not ideal. When I tried an earlier version of Ubuntu, the display didn't even work quite that well. It didn't detect all the display resolutions, and I was stuck at I think 1024 by 768 or something ridiculous like that. Newer versions of the Linux kernel seem to work better with that. Give you a little look at, say, some video.
My job is to make college easier because students have a lot on them.
Hi, this is Brad Linder with Lilliputian, and what these allow you to do, for instance, is return to the... I'm going to mute that for a second and just show you screen brightness levels. We can go up to 400 nits of maximum brightness, or we can get relatively dim here. Because my camera is automatically adjusting, you can't get the full effect of that, but you do get a sense of sort of what video looks like on the screen. I think it's fine for media playback. Speakers get... The other keys do pretty much what you expect them to, including the start key. Reasonably loud, but a little bit distorted at the higher levels. You do have Bang & Olufsen audio for the stereo speakers, which are sort of angled on those beveled edges here. And you do have a couple of interesting options here, including support for advanced EQ options. So you can manually adjust the bass, the treble, dialogue clarity settings, but you can also go into presets for music, for jazz, country, live music, bass, heavy, rock, etc. I found the club setting tends to work well for music that I stream from Spotify. Your results may vary. Out of the box, I found that the audio was particularly not very, you didn't get very much bass, you didn't get a lot of clarity, and adjusting those EQ presets really did help a little bit. But it's, if you really want sort of an immersive experience for watching videos or playing games, you might want to plug in some speakers or plug in a headset or something along those lines. It does support Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5, and I was able to use it with a Bluetooth mouse without any difficulties. The wireless connection's maybe not quite as reliable as some others that I've tested. It works great in this office because literally like 3 feet down from me is the wireless router. If I take it farther away, it drops out periodically, but usually not for very long. And so I'm not necessarily going to ding it for that, especially given the $750 starting price. But I do have other laptops that have slightly more reliable wireless performance. As I mentioned, we've got sort of support for multi-touch gestures. We can do pinch to zoom. We can do multitasking here. Without running through an entire benchmark, I'll show you that GIMP, which is a pretty resource-intensive application, loads pretty quickly. And then we can use that to edit images. And so forth. So that is just sort of, the tip of the iceberg, really, of what you can do with something like the HP Pavilion Aero 13. I think it is a winning laptop, honestly. It doesn't have the Thunderbolt port. It doesn't have an infrared camera. You do have to pay extra for some features, and upgradability is limited. Linux support is not great. But aside from that, and I know that sounds like a lot when you say it out loud, it is a thin and light notebook. It is so light that it's the sort of machine that you can really just throw in your bag and take anywhere with you, and it barely weighs you down. It gets long enough battery life for almost a complete day of work, and if you need a little bit more runtime, the AC adapter is not very heavy, or you could take a USB power bank with you if you wanted to be able to keep using it on a plane or someplace where you might not be able to plug it in. It's relatively sturdy with this magnesium aluminum chassis. It runs quietly and relatively cool. I don't know if you heard the fan come on during the entire time that I was shooting this video, and even under heavier load, the fan isn't particularly noisy. The air intake is pretty efficient, with air coming in through the bottom, getting sucked up and blown around on the inside, and then out through this area back here. So you'll probably never really feel it on your hands or lap or anything along those lines. And it is available with up to a 2560 by 1600 pixel display. So you do have sort of those even more premium options if you want those features. So overall, if I was looking for a new laptop right now, this would definitely be pretty high on my list of things to consider, because I really do value that combination of portability and price. And the only real downsides I can think of are ones that I'm probably not going to use very often, like that Thunderbolt port. If you were really looking for something for gaming purposes, you might want something that has Thunderbolt so that you can connect an external dock. But for a portable notebook for general purpose use, I don't think that's necessarily a deal breaker. And it's actually something that really affects most AMD laptops, which don't have Thunderbolt ports either these days. So the HP Pavilion Aero 13, starting price of $750, sells for about $1,000 as configured, and you can find more details about this laptop and other portable computers at luluputing.com.